Leadership skills can be learned, and mindful leaders of nonprofit organizations are lifelong learners who understand that we need to constantly update our leadership skills and abilities. And my guest and professor and author, Dr. Theresa Ricke-Kiely, will share why these skills are different from our innate traits and how we can leverage them to be powerful leaders. These skills are from her new book, The Path to Mindful Leadership: Practices for Nonprofit Success. As a bonus for watching, we're offering a QR code to access the first chapter of her book, which we will cover in this three-part series. There's a link down below to download it, and if you want to order her book, there's a link for that as well. We want you to be successful leading your nonprofit. That's why we offer nonprofit docs and videos for free. But we would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe to our channel, as it's what keeps these videos coming. But only subscribe if you're a nonprofit professional who wants to change the world for better, because that's what we do here. We give you the tools and knowledge to make the world a better place. And most importantly, we want your comments, because we want to know what your challenges are so that we can help with new videos. So let's get started with the final part 3 of 3 parts of The Path to Mindful Leadership with Dr. Theresa Ricke-Kiely. We just talked about traits of a good leader. Now we're going to talk about the skills of a good leader. And Theresa, you can teach skills, but you can't teach traits, because those are kind of innate within a person. But
Right.
skills, that's a whole different deal, right?
That's right.
So what
That's
is the
right.
difference between traits and skills?
Yeah. So again, trait is something that you're born with. Not usually something that you can change easily. If we were to go back to the beginning of of our country in the U.S., you'll read things about leadership about George Washington, and they'll say, "Well, of course he's a leader. Look at how tall he is." That's a trait for some people. Even today, when there are elections, you will see people talk about how tall people are. Now, does how tall you are have anything to do with your leadership skill? For those of you who don't know me, I'm 6 feet tall. I would say absolutely, but other people
I'm not
might
6 feet tall, so I might disagree.
So
Yeah.
you might disagree. So, I can't help how tall I am, but I certainly can help and how I learn different types of leadership skills. And again, if you open that first chapter, you'll see a whole list of skills. It's not every skill that's out there, but there are a lot of skills that are in there that you can learn about and practice. Anything with leadership or mindfulness takes practice, and you can get better at it, enhance those leadership skills. So skills are things that you can learn. And I'm delighted because I teach a lot of students and I work with a lot of nonprofit organizations about leadership skills and how they can improve their overall leadership experience.
So when we talk about leadership skills, what are we really talking about?
I like to put it into buckets, and there was a theory developed by Katz in the last century, so it goes back a while. But he talks about skills being conceptual, things that are abstract, things like strategy, things like decision making, things like mission. Those types of things that you can think about, but you can't really feel. And then you can think about skills that are more relational. A lot of leadership skills have to do with relationship building, with networking, with connecting, with making sure that people feel comfortable and safe. And then you have those skills that are more task oriented, understanding that you need computer programs, for example, or how to write a grant. Those types of things could also be skills that are needed in certain leadership positions. And when you look at those big buckets, you can see that other things come out of that. So again, I have a huge list here, Mark. Do you want to throw one out, or do you want me to
Well, one
start
kind of
just
jumps out of
talking?
me here. One
Yeah.
kind of jumps out of me because I'm always interested in the answer to this question. You have on here motivating others. And I find this
Yeah.
intriguing because people are motivated by different things. And it seems
Yeah.
to me you have to know people pretty well to
That's
know how
right.
to motivate them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And your ability to motivate changes over time. So if you were asking, and I do ask this when I teach very young students, like, what's the first thing you want out of your first professional job? Almost always they say, I want money. They're not thinking
Sure.
about their
Well, yeah.
retirement. They're not thinking about healthcare, because they tend to be healthy. Retirement's 50 years away. Why am I going to worry about that? They're worried about being paid appropriately for the job they have. They want to get out of that first level payment and get into that professionalism. You ask somebody my age, what motivates me? Oh gosh, it's going to be, where do I live? It's going to be, who are the people who surround me? What is the retirement? Those types of things are important to me. So motivating others, depending on who your team is very different. I've had some people who don't care about healthcare because their spouse or their partner, has excellent healthcare. They don't need to worry about that. They're worried about other types of things. They're worried about flexibility in the workplace. Are they able to work from home? What kind of budget do I have for the things that I need to do? How many conferences can I go to? So motivation is a moving target. What motivated me 30 years ago is very different today. And it'll probably be very different 10 years from now. So that's something that you really have to know and monitor and engage people to understand what's motivating to them. And the larger the organization, the harder that is. You have different
Yeah.
people with different priorities, and you have to make sure that they are those met.
I guess the easiest way to know this is just to ask them,
To
right?
ask them and to understand exactly what that means. So, when I'm dealing with young parents, having flexibility to work at home when their child is ill is really important to them. For
Or when their
others,
children are in school, the flexibility to go to events,
that's
those
right.
kinds of things. Sure.
That's
Yeah.
that's right. So, but when you're dealing with people my age, I was really appreciative when my mother became deathly ill, that I was allowed time away to spend with her in her last months on this earth. So that was really important. But 20 years ago, that wasn't even something I was thinking about. So
Right.
understanding where people are in their life and how do you manage the team so that people can have that flexibility is an important skill and something that leaders need to be aware of.
And it seems to me that this also affects the policies of the organization, right?
Hmm.
If you're
Yeah.
very, very strict and stringent on your policies and you say you only get 3 sick days or
Hmm.
whatever, that could be a real demotivating thing for someone to actually continue working there, right? Because
Well, and
maybe
it
they need
is.
more time off and things like
Yeah,
that.
and it's tricky for smaller organizations because you might not have the capacity. If that person's out, services might not happen that day. So
Right.
you really need to look at, what are the needs of the organization? What are the needs of the people? And how do I balance that? And as a leader, that is something that's extremely
Mm,
difficult because you can't
yeah.
always do that. Meanwhile, you also have the opposite problem and large bureaucracies where you have thousands of people. You have those rigid rules so that you have some sort of equity and somebody isn't getting more than somebody else. Or if you're in a union environment, you want to make sure that there's equity there and that you're not breaking any contracts. So it's a delicate balance.
A few years ago, I was contacted by a board that I had consulted with. They were an arts board, and their executive director's husband had contracted terminal cancer.
Oh,
And she wanted more time off and she wanted a leave of absence to come back. And they were not a big organization, they weren't small, but they weren't huge. And so the chair called and she goes, "What do we do about this? Do we have to release her? Do we keep her?" And I said, "Well, the big question is she worth keeping? Are you happy enough with her that you are willing to give her this concession, knowing that when she comes back, she's going to be a great leader?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, we're very happy with her." I said, "Well, finding great leaders is hard. And if you can have somebody fill in the interim until she comes back," I said, if he's terminal, eventually she will come back. And so that's what they did. But they
mhm.
were really unsure of how to approach all this because they didn't have great resources.
Yeah, yeah.
Right,
It's really a delicate balance. And then once you do that for one person, you set a precedent. So again, that leader needs
right.
to strategically think, what are the consequences down the road if I do this? It would be nice if that could happen in every single situation, but that's not always possible, especially if you're a smaller organization and you don't have resources.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about focus. What do you mean by that?
So focus is something that I think in our era, multitasking was highly appreciated. You know, being able to do something and then do something else and then do something else on top of it. But when you do that, especially if you're talking with people, people feel like they're not being appreciated, they're not being heard. It also is if you're doing a task, it means that task isn't being done to the best of your ability. So focus really is, and this is a practice, it's hard for many of us, getting rid of the distractions around you, making sure that you're listening to the person, that you're paying attention to the document that you're writing, and really giving yourself time to make sure you're having a high quality of conversation or work. We are so distracted today. I think I've seen since the advent of social media, you know, people are looking here and then they're looking here and then they're looking here and they're looking for that next hit of what's happening or the fear of missing out. And they're not focused and they miss a lot of things because they're not focused. So having the ability to focus is important as a leader. And if you think you're focused, what I would encourage you to do is put your timer on for a minute. And when I do mindfulness with teams, this is the activity I start out with. And it's like, focus on your breath for 1 minute, 60 seconds. Sounds pretty easy, but I'll say, if another thought comes into your head, start over. And boy, people can't focus on their breath for even a minute. It's
Yeah, it's
hard.
tough.
So it's something that you want to practice. Like, you know, just focus on that conversation. Turn off your phone. You know, we're so addicted to our devices or our email or other types of things. We're not paying attention to what's happening. So being focused is really important, and people appreciate it when they know that you are really listening to them. But it takes a lot of practice, Mark. It's not something that comes easily to most of us.
We are making the first chapter available. And in the first chapter, there's probably 30 leadership skills and 30 traits that are listed in that chapter. So we're not covering all of them in these sessions. But if you want to download that, they'll all be there. So while we're talking about focus, and you mentioned listening, let's talk about listening. Because I got to tell you, I know that I've been a big offender of not listening as close as I could. I find that somebody triggers something in my mind, and
Hmm.
all of a sudden my imagination is playing over here, and I'm not
Right?
paying attention to what they're saying. And they finally go, "So what do you think?" And I'm like, "Oh no, I have no idea what they're talking about." So let's talk about listening skills, because I think that 80% of our communication problems are that we don't listen.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I think we are easily distracted, and not only with other things, you know, what am I going to have for dinner tonight as you're talking with somebody, but also getting ready to respond. And I know being a native New Yorker, I'm always thinking about, well, what do I want to say next? Or how am I going to, include my own thoughts into this conversation? And to take a step back and to really listen without opening your mouth is difficult. So again, it's something that you can practice. Start off with short conversations, start off with short videos. It doesn't even have to be a real person. You can go and listen to a YouTube video and really focus on it and see how many times your mind is distracted. And then you know that you can start practicing mindfulness exercises in order to have that focus.
And I think repeating back to people what you think they just said to you is really helpful, because number one, if you look in the dictionary, any given word can have anywhere from 3 to 40 definitions, right? And so when they're telling you something, you're seeing one thing in your mind, they're seeing another. So I think repeating back to them what you think they just said is a good practice, because it helps to make sure that you've understood them, but it also helps you in terms of making your own formulation.
Absolutely. Yeah. But that, again, takes a lot of time and effort, and not everybody wants to invest that. But again, comes back tenfold if people feel like you really heard them. I do want to say, though, a lot of people will say, well, my boss doesn't listen to me. And what they really mean is my boss didn't agree with me. Those are two very different things. So I can hear somebody and not agree with them, and they're not listening to why I'm not agreeing with them. So don't, again, beat yourself up if you think, okay, well, that person's not listening to me, when it's a disagreement and that person has the power to make the decision in a different direction.
When I was working at Butler University, the president was Bobby Fong. He has passed away since then, but every week he would go to Starbucks on campus and sit there for an hour, and you could come up and ask him any question, talking about anything. So one day I walked up and I said, "Let me ask you something. Why don't we have a visual arts program here?" Right? We have performing arts, we have music, we have dance, but we don't have a visual arts program. And he said, "Well, because we never will have one." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "Because Indiana University has the Herron School of Art, and there's no need for us to compete with them because they are the renowned art school in Indianapolis. We're in Indianapolis, and it would be," he said, there really wouldn't be any advantages to us doing that." He said, "I appreciate your thoughts on this." He said, "I know it would be great to have one." He said, "But I just don't think we'd be serving our mission best in that way." So that's a prime example of he heard me,
Yeah,
but he didn't agree with me,
that's
right?
right.
And he
That's
gave me
right.
the reasons why, and I thought, well, okay, that makes sense, right? I
Hmm.
wasn't offended that he didn't say, "Oh, you're right. We should have a visual arts department."
Yeah,
So I think that is important. And I've always had a lot of respect for him, partially because of that,
right.
that interaction. Yeah.
That's right.
So what else on here would be kind of tantalizing? Oh, I see one. Conflict resolution.
Yeah. Managing conflict. I will tell you, I think more people have problems with this than any other skill. People do not like to engage in conflict. And
Oh,
when I talk about this in my coaching practice or in my classes, I say stop thinking of conflict as being bad. Conflict is a way of innovating, hearing new ideas, seeing different perspectives, problem solving, even seeing that a problem is coming. And having those deep kinds of conversations are extremely helpful. Now, if you have conflict because of something that is toxic, I've had a lot of staff who are insecure or jealous or have, just negative ideas about others, and they just bring a lot of disharmony. That's a little different. But so many cases we can use conflict as a way, as an opportunity, if you will. Okay, we have a problem. We have two different perspectives on this. Let's talk about the best ways and why we're thinking, one way or another way, and work our way through it. That's really a way to develop a deep respect for your team and for people to get to understand and have compassion for why something else should happen rather than what's being placed on the table. But conflict is inevitable. I haven't worked in any organization that there hasn't been conflict, either
right.
personal or professional, and it's something that you need to learn to deal with. And most places that I teach in the MPA program at the University of Arizona, and when I worked for the University of Notre Dame, we have conflict programs because we know it's something that's out there. It happens at the individual level, it happens at the country level, and everything in between. So understanding the reasons for conflict and how to move through that is really important. Most people would like to put it to the side. And do you know what happens when you ignore that conflict, Mark?
Yes, I do.
It tends to blow up.
It's
It's a
worse. Yeah.
huge conflict and it's a huge problem. More people are involved, and now you still have to deal with it. So making sure that you understand what conflict is. There's again assessments on this. You can figure out how you deal with conflict. Are you the person that runs away? I'm not going to deal with that now. Are you the person that I'm going to, smack that person, the beating, as you say? Not literally, but certainly from
Psychologically.
that's right. Are you the person that wants to compromise? Like, okay, I'm going to do this, but you got to do this, which is a win-win, lose-lose. Or are you
Right.
the person to think, okay, let's get beyond this and think about in nonprofits, what we want to think about is what's best for the organization. So much about conflict is about what I want versus what you want, and we forget about the mission. So when you pull back to say, okay, what is the best thing for the people we're serving? that puts a totally different perspective on it. And you can be really helpful by pointing that out to people. Like, let's forget about what you want and what I want. What's best for the student? What's best for the client? What's best for the patient? And it puts a different perspective on it. But learning to come up with those questions is definitely a skill, and one that every leader should understand how to deal with. And again, conflict is not solved overnight. Sometimes, again, not reacting and taking a step back and responding is a good mindful way of dealing with it.
One of the techniques I have used to when there's personnel conflicts, people just don't like each other, is to have them do what I call a commonality exercise, where they have to sit down together and they have to find as many things in common that they have.
Hmm.
Okay. Could be 10 things, could be 30 things, could be 50 things, and to see how much they have in common. Because what I have found is the more that people have in common, the less personal conflict there is. And we all have people that we have as good friends that nobody understands why we're good friends with them. It's led me to believe that everybody has their qualities. And most of the time, we're friends with people because even though they may have flaws, what we have in common with them is greater than the flaws that we know they have.
Right,
And
right.
so, I found that that often solves the problem
Hmm.
because it doesn't take away from the conflict, but it reduces the impact on that relationship.
Yeah,
You
no,
know,
absolutely.
that's one technique, but
Yeah,
yeah,
no. And there
yeah,
are so many, but again, it's a skill that you can look into and learn. But ignoring the conflict doesn't help. Or because you don't have, I've had many young leaders or inexperienced leaders say, well, I don't have a conflict with them, so it must be, other people, or I'm just not seeing it. If I don't see it, it must not be happening. And that's really a naive way of leading. If you're hearing from other people that they're having issues, it's your responsibility to look into that and advocate for
yeah.
others.
Here's one that I think is really important, especially in our current state of the union, is cultural competence.
Yeah.
Understanding the cultural differences between people because we are a melting pot here, whether
Hmm.
some people want to admit that or not.
Yeah,
And the fact is that we have to deal with people from all kinds of cultures, all kinds of backgrounds, so on and
that's
so
right.
forth. So, can you speak to that a little bit in terms of
Yeah.
how you
Yeah.
develop that?
Absolutely. And this is a skill that kind of ebbs and flows. So I have a certificate in the Intercultural Development Inventory, the IDI. And you can look that up. And there's, again, another assessment for this to see where you fall in the area of cultural competence. And it really has to do with your family, your community, and the opportunities that you've had. So, when I lived in New York, I had a high level of cultural competence. There were a lot of people who were different from me in race, religion, ethnicity, because there's just a lot of people from a lot of different areas in that part of the world. And when I moved to the Midwest, that wasn't as predominant. There were a lot more white people and a lot more, the predominant religion was Christianity. And you really have to think about, well, how do I gain that cultural competence? What opportunities can I have in order to understand people who are different from me? So you have to really put yourselves in that situation. So whether it's traveling, whether it's going to different places where you can meet people who are different from you, talk to people who are different from you, those are the types of ways that you can become more culturally competent. And again, helpful to the organization. If you can think more broadly of how people are in this world and how you interact with them, the better a leader you'll be when, different people that you serve or that you work with come through the doors. Extremely important. Understanding, anybody can go to just do a search on Harvard bias assessment, and you can take your own assessment to see if you have any biases. They have so many in there, from gender to race to religion, all different types of things that you can look at yourself. Again, mindfulness is about being self aware. and understanding where you land, and then coming up with an intentional plan to develop your cultural competence. So it's something that's really important as the world evolves, as different people come into our path, and understanding and being empathetic with those of us who are different in our workplaces or the people that we serve.
Now, before we wrap up, is there any other thing on here that you feel that we really need to talk about and cover before we end our conversation?
Oh gosh, there's so many, but
I know
I
there's
think,
so many, and we could spend days on
yeah, we
these.
sure
Yeah.
could. One that just hit my eye is storytelling. And this is something that
Ah,
you do really well.
yeah, I
And I
love
will say,
storytelling.
in
Yeah.
the nonprofit community, when it comes to connecting to others, when it comes to donors, when it comes to sharing insights and lessons with your team, storytelling is really powerful. This is something that I am in practice in. This is not something that comes to me naturally. This is not something that I love to do, but I can appreciate how incredibly important it is. I serve on a board here that works on literacy, and we have an annual event which is all about people's stories, how they came to engage with the organization and what they're doing. And this last event I went to, literally, Mark, I was crying. The stories were so powerful. Lives were being changed, and we raised thousands and thousands of dollars because of people's truth telling and being able to share their personal stories. And I know you know this better than anybody because it's your area, but I think that is something that if people can get really good at, they will really be an effective nonprofit leader, because people connect to stories, not data, not facts. They want to be touched. I think Kouzes and Posner, they have a book out called Encouraging the Heart and their transformational theory. And I think that people are really missing that today in the day of data and evidence. And all those things are certainly important. But how do you weave those things into telling a story so our hearts are touched? And in a nonprofit sector, it's really important.
It's absolutely essential. I'm glad you brought that up because I too have been brought to tears, and I have written checks because of those stories, and not because of statistics, not because of how many people they've helped. It's about the personal stories. And you're right, it's very, very powerful. I remember I went to consult with an alumni board of a university, and they were having problems getting people to come to the meetings and getting people to head committees and things like that. So they had this annual meeting. They brought me in and they said, "Can you help us?" I said, "Well, I don't know. Let's see what we can do." So the first thing I did was I had them all go around the table. There were about 20 people there. And I said, "What I'd like to know is I'd like to know why you're on the board. What is your connection to this institution?" Well, as it unraveled and people started revealing that this institution changed their life in a fundamental way, and that's why they're on this board, people started revealing more and more. And by the time we got halfway around the table, I mean, people were emotional and they were engaged. And by the time we were finished, they had this renewed sense of mission because they realized this was something that they needed to really nurture because of their personal experience with the institution, and they wanted to bring that to other people.
Right.
So, and it was all about their story.
That's
That's all
right.
it was. And so I absolutely agree. This story is such a powerful thing.
I will say, though, you have to be very careful and not exploit people's personal experiences. That's an integrity and a character issue, right? So you're not
Right.
doing it to make the money. People need to be authentic and wanting to share their stories, and you have to be very careful about how you do that. So
And the other
there
thing,
are ethics involved in that.
you don't want to do is you want to tell a story that's real raw. You don't want to go to therapy on people, right? Eh,
That's
no,
right.
I've seen it happen,
Yeah, yeah,
you want to tell a story where there is a redemption.
that's
There
right.
is a finality to it. and you
Hmm.
could say, because of this, this happened, and
Hmm.
voila, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, storytelling, it's a powerful tool, and I think it's underrated. I don't think
Hmm.
it's used as much as it needs to be. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
funny because, when I do consult and coach and when I teach in the classroom, people say, "Well, how can I develop that?" And I learned from another colleague that you can actually go to classes on, improv and
Mhm.
actually, start telling stories. But there are also other groups that you can actually practice, and people will give you feedback, like Toastmasters, and those are ways to improve that muscle as well. So
Yeah.
one of the things I do share in the book is how can you get better at these things and have intentional strategies for doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, Teresa, thank
Mm.
you so
You're
much for
welcome. My
sharing that.
pleasure. This
And
has been fun.
a last thing here. This is Teresa's book, The Path to Mindful Leadership Practices for Nonprofit Success. But even if you're not in a nonprofit, I assume you are since you're watching this, but if you're not, this is a great book. I mean, it's not just about nonprofit leadership, but it certainly is focused on that.
Yeah.
And we'll put a link to the book down below. We'll put a link to the first free chapter, and that'll have all these leadership traits and also um, the other traits, leadership traits and leadership skills for you to look at and think about. And of course, there's a lot of content there. Have a table of contents too, so that you know what else is in the book. But I would highly recommend the book. It's a great read.
Thank
And
you.
although it's written by a fine academic, it's not written academic jargon. It's very accessible
That's right. That's
for
right. It's meant for the
practitioners and other
practitioner.
leaders. Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. So Teresa, thank you.
Thank you.
And I hope you have a great day, and I wish you much success on your book.
Thank you so much, Mark.
All
Have a
right.
good one.
Take care. All
Bye
right.
bye.